December 1944. The Ardennes Forest. A German sniper named Klaus Bergmann lies perfectly still in the frozen ruins of a Belgian farmhouse, his breath forming small clouds in the bitter air. Through his scope, he watches a young American soldier stumble through the snow below. The soldier cannot be more than 19 years old. His hands shake as he tries to light a cigarette, cupping the match against the wind that carries the distant thunder of artillery across the white wasteland. Klaus adjusts his rifle. The crosshairs settle on the boy's chest. His finger moves to the trigger. This is the moment. One squeeze and another enemy falls. One squeeze and Klaus fulfills his duty to the fatherland, to his unit, to the war that has consumed everything he once believed about honor and purpose. But something stops him. The young soldier finally gets his cigarette lit. For just 3 seconds, Klaus sees the boy's face illuminate in the small flame. The expression there is not one of a warrior or an invader. It is the face of someone terrified, exhausted, and desperately far from home. Klaus knows that face. He has seen it in the mirror each morning since 1941. He has seen it on his younger brother's face the day Friedrich left for the Eastern Front and never returned. The young American takes a long drag from his cigarette, closes his eyes, and for a moment seems to forget the war entirely. Klaus's finger relaxes on the trigger. The crosshairs drift away. Something inside him, something he thought the war had killed years ago, refuses to let him fire. The wind picks up, rattling the broken shutters of the farmhouse. Klaus pulls back from his rifle and presses his forehead against the frozen stone wall. What is he doing? This hesitation could cost German lives. This mercy is a betrayal of everything he has been ordered to become. But when he looks through the scope again, the American soldier is sitting in the snow, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. Klaus cannot tell if the boy is crying or simply shivering from the cold that has already claimed the toes of 2 men in Klaus's own unit. Either way, Klaus knows what he must do. He does nothing. He watches the young soldier finish his cigarettes, stand up with great effort, and disappear into the tree line heading west. Klaus never fires. He tells himself it is because the shot would have revealed his position. He tells himself it is tactical restraint. But he knows the truth. In that frozen moment, humanity won over duty. Compassion defeated orders. Klaus Bergmann, a soldier of the Wehrmacht, chose to see a human being instead of a target. He will carry this decision like a stone in his chest for the rest of his life, never knowing if it was the greatest sin of his military service or the only truly honorable thing he did in the entire war. The young American soldier's name was James Sullivan. Though everyone called him Jimmy, he was 19 years old. From a small town in Pennsylvania, where his father ran a hardware store and his mother sang in the church choir every Sunday. Jimmy had enlisted 6 months after his 18th birthday, driven by patriotic fervor and the naive certainty that the war would be an adventure. The Ardennes Forest taught him otherwise. That December afternoon, when he stopped to light a cigarette, Jimmy had been separated from his unit for 3 hours. He was lost, freezing, and convinced he would either die from exposure or be captured before nightfall. Every shadow in the forest seemed to hide an enemy. Every crack of a distant rifle made his heart hammer against his ribs. When he finally managed to light that cigarette, it was not rebellion or confidence. It was resignation. If death was coming, he wanted one last moment of something familiar, something from the world before uniforms and mud and fear. He never saw the sniper. He never knew that a German soldier had him in his sights, finger on the trigger, death one breath away. Jimmy sat in the snow and felt something break inside him, the last remnant of the boy who had believed war was glorious. Then he stood up, forced himself to move, and somehow found his way back to Allied lines as darkness fell. Jimmy survived the Battle of the Bulge. He survived the Rhine crossing. He survived until May 1945, when Germany surrendered and the war in Europe finally ended. He came home to Pennsylvania with a Purple Heart for shrapnel wounds, persistent nightmares, and a silence about the war that his family learnt not to disturb. He married a schoolteacher named Dorothy. They had 3 children. Jimmy took over his father's hardware store and became a fixture in town, known for his kindness to customers and his habit of giving free supplies to families struggling to make ends meet. But there were nights when Dorothy would wake to find him sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, lost in a forest thousands of miles away. Jimmy never told anyone about that afternoon in the snow. He could not explain the feeling he had experienced, that strange sense of being watched and then released, as if something or someone had decided he deserved to live. He carried it as a wordless gratitude, an unexplained second chance that shaped how he lived every day afterward. He was gentler with his children than other fathers. He was quicker to forgive. He volunteered at the Veterans Hall and listened to other soldiers tell their stories, offering them the compassion he somehow felt had been given to him in that frozen Belgian forest. Jimmy Sullivan lived a good life, though it was haunted at the edges by a war he could never fully leave behind. Klaus Bergmann surrendered to American forces in April 1945. Exhausted and relieved, the war was over. He spent 2 years in a prisoner of war camp, then returned to a Germany that existed only in fragments and ash. His hometown near Dresden had been bombed into rubble. His parents were dead. His brother Friedrich was confirmed killed on the Eastern Front in 1943. Klaus had nothing and no one. He worked construction, rebuilding the cities his country had helped destroy. He married a widow named Anna who had lost her first husband at Stalingrad. They built a modest life together in a small apartment in West Berlin. Klaus became a schoolteacher, teaching history to children who grew up in the shadow of their parents' war. He never spoke about his service. Unlike some veterans who wore their military past with pride or bitterness, Klaus kept his locked away. But he could not forget the young American soldier in the snow. That moment lived in his memory with a clarity that never faded. He remembered the boy's trembling hands, the small flame of the match, the expression of exhaustion and fear. Klaus had made countless decisions during the war, fired countless rounds, followed countless orders. But that single moment of restraint, that choice not to kill, became the fulcrum on which his entire memory of the war balanced. As the decades passed and Germany transformed from ruins into prosperity, Klaus began to wonder about the soldier he had spared. Did the boy survive the war? Did he go home? Did he have children, a life, a future that Klaus had allowed to exist by moving his finger away from the trigger? The questions haunted him, not with guilt, but with a strange kind of hope. If that young American had lived, if he had built a life and found happiness, then perhaps Klaus's own life had meant something beyond the violence and destruction. Perhaps that one act of mercy redeemed all the other things he had done and seen. In 1982, Klaus retired from teaching. His health was declining, his heart weakening from decades of smoking and stress. Anna urged him to relax, to enjoy his remaining years, but Klaus felt a growing urgency. He began writing letters to veteran organizations, American military archives, anyone who might help him find a young soldier who had been in the Ardennes forest in December 1944. His letters were vague. He could not provide a name or unit number. He only had a memory of a face, a moment, a choice. Most letters went unanswered. But Klaus kept writing, driven by a need he could not fully articulate. He had to know if his mercy had mattered. In 1985, Klaus's persistent letters reached a historian in Washington, D.C., who specialized in Battle of the Bulge research. The historian was intrigued by Klaus's story and began working with German and American veteran registries, cross-referencing dates, locations, and units. It took 8 months of careful investigation, but eventually a name emerged: James Sullivan, Pennsylvania. The historian contacted Jimmy through the local Veterans of Foreign Wars chapter. When Jimmy received the message explaining that a German veteran was searching for an American soldier he had encountered near a Belgian farmhouse in December 1944, Jimmy's hands began to shake. He sat at his kitchen table, now 70 years old, and remembered that afternoon in the snow. The feeling of being watched. The inexplicable sense that death had been near and then passed him by. Could it be possible? Had there really been someone in those ruins? Someone who had chosen not to fire? The historian facilitated an exchange of letters. Klaus wrote first, his English careful and formal, explaining what he had done and asking if Jimmy might be the soldier he remembered. Jimmy's response came 3 weeks later. He described the afternoon in detail. The desperate attempt to light a cigarette, the overwhelming fear, the strange feeling of being released from something he could not see. The details matched Klaus's memory perfectly. They agreed to meet. The historian arranged for both men to travel to Belgium in the summer of 1986, to the area where their paths had first crossed. The farmhouse where Klaus had positioned himself was gone, replaced by a memorial garden that commemorated the battle. But the landscape was still recognizable, the same rolling hills, the same tree lines, now peaceful and green instead of frozen and deadly. Jimmy arrived with his wife Dorothy and his youngest son. Klaus came with Anna, a small leather journal where he had written down everything he remembered about the war. They met on a warm June afternoon, under a sky so blue it seemed impossible that this place had once been hell. When Jimmy and Klaus saw each other for the first time, both men stopped walking. 42 years collapsed into nothing. The sniper and the target stood facing each other, old men now, bodies bent by time, but eyes still carrying the memory of that frozen December day. Neither spoke at first. The moment was too large for immediate words. Dorothy held Jimmy's arm, feeling him tremble. Anna stood close to Klaus, ready to steady him if needed. Then Jimmy took a step forward, and then another, until he stood directly in front of Klaus Bergmann. Jimmy extended his hand. Klaus looked at it, then at Jimmy's face, and felt tears begin to fall. He gripped Jimmy's hand in both of his own. Neither man could speak through the emotion flooding through them. The historian stepped back, giving them space. Dorothy and Anna stood together, two women who had loved men haunted by war, watching those men finally find something they had both been searching for without knowing it. When Klaus finally found his voice, the first words he spoke were in broken English. "I am sorry. I am sorry for everything, for the war, for what my country did, for aiming my rifle at your heart." Jimmy shook his head, his own tears flowing freely now. "You let me live," he said. "You could have killed me. You should have killed me. But you didn't. You gave me everything. I got to go home. I got to see my mother again. I got to meet Dorothy. I got to have children and watch them grow up. I got to live. Because of you." Klaus broke down completely then, decades of guilt and hope and uncertainty pouring out of him. Jimmy pulled him into an embrace, two old soldiers holding each other up. The people who had gathered in the memorial guard, other veterans, local residents, the historian, watched in silence. Some wept, some bowed their heads. All of them understood they were witnessing something profound, a moment of grace emerging from the darkest chapter of the century. For 3 days, Jimmy and Klaus walked together through the Belgian countryside, retracing the ground where they had first encountered each other. Klaus showed Jimmy the spot where the farmhouse had stood, describing his position and his view through the scope. Jimmy stood where he had sat in the snow and told Klaus about the desperation he had felt, the certainty that he would not survive the day. They shared their stories. Klaus spoke about his brother Friedrich, about the slow erosion of his belief in the war, about the moment when he realized he could not pull the trigger. Jimmy talked about his nightmares, about the guilt he felt when friends did not make it home, about the life he'd tried to build on the foundation of surviving when others had not. They discovered they had lived parallel lives. Both men had become teachers. Both had dedicated themselves to service and kindness. Both had been shaped by that single moment in ways they were only now beginning to understand fully. On the final evening, they sat together in a small cafe in the town nearest to where they had met. Klaus opened his leather journal and showed Jimmy the entry he had written on the night of December 16th, 1944. In German, translated by the historian, it read, "Today, I failed to kill an enemy. I do not know if this makes me a coward or a man. I only know that I could not destroy what I saw in his face." Jimmy and Klaus remained friends for the rest of their lives. They wrote letters regularly, visited each other twice more, and spoke by phone on the anniversaries of that December day. When Klaus died in 1991, Jimmy traveled to Berlin for the funeral and stood beside Anna, holding her hand as they lowered Klaus into the ground. Jimmy told Klaus's children and grandchildren about their father's mercy, about the moment that he'd given Jimmy his life and allowed everyone in that room to exist. In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge, Jimmy returned to Belgium one last time. He was 94 years old, frail but determined. Dorothy had passed away 2 years earlier, and Jimmy knew his own time was limited. He stood in the memorial garden where he had met Klaus, and he left 2 items at the base of the monument. The first was the cigarette lighter he had used that December afternoon. He'd kept it all these years, a talisman of survival. The second was a photograph of himself and Klaus, arms around each other's shoulders, taken during their reunion. On the back, Jimmy had written, "2 enemies became brothers. 2 soldiers found peace. May all who see this remember that even in war, humanity can prevail." Jimmy Sullivan died peacefully in his sleep in 1995, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. At his funeral, his youngest son read a letter Jimmy had written to be opened after his death. In it, Jimmy reflected on the moment that had defined his life. "I have lived 70 years since a German soldier chose not to kill me. I have tried every day to be worthy of that mercy. I have tried to show others the compassion he showed me. I do not know why Klaus Bergmann stayed his hand. Perhaps he saw his own brother in my face. Perhaps he was simply exhausted by death. Perhaps in that moment God moved his finger away from the trigger. I only know that his choice rippled forward through time, touching everyone I loved, everyone I taught, everyone I helped. My children exist because Klaus chose mercy. My grandchildren carry his gift in their veins. This is what we must remember about war. It destroys almost everything, but it cannot destroy the human capacity to choose compassion over cruelty. Even in the darkest moments, even when we are ordered to kill, we can choose to see each other as human beings, rather than enemies. Klaus gave me my life. I spent that life trying to give others the same gift, the chance to be seen, to be spared, to be loved, despite everything that divides us. The story of Klaus Bergmann and Jimmy Sullivan has been told to thousands of students, veterans, and peacemakers. It appears in museums dedicated to reconciliation. It is taught in schools as an example of the complexity of war and the persistence of human decency. Their reunion photograph hangs in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, not as a memorial to the war itself, but as a testament to what can exist beyond it. Two men born into different nations, trained to destroy each other, found a way to recognize their shared humanity. In doing so, they created something that outlasted the armies, the ideologies, and the hatred that had divided their generation. The crosshairs that once held Jimmy Sullivan in their deadly focus became the lens through which both men learned to see clearly. Not enemies, but brothers. Not targets, but human beings deserving of the mercy we all hope to receive. In the end, the most powerful weapon Klaus Bergmann ever possessed was not his rifle. It was his refusal to fire. And the most important battle Jimmy Sullivan ever won was not fought with bullets or bombs. It was won in that moment when an enemy became a savior, and two men began a journey toward a peace that the war could never destroy.